He's a peeping Tom.
Hello there, my loves, and welcome once more to my channel. Today it's all about time travel. Hopefully there was a little clip at the beginning there of Martin McFly's father skinnying up a tree and peeping through a young woman's window. So hopefully that'll set the tone for what's going to be coming down the line, or up the line. We'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, Back to the Future is one of my favourite films of all time. I've also got here Marty McFly himself perched precariously between my nipples. But we're not talking about Back to the Future today. I'll do that another time. Today we're doing three different time travel related novels. First of all, we'll be looking at Robert Silverberg's Up the Line. Then it's the turn of Ken Grimwood's Replay. And finally, last but definitely not least, we'll have Blake Crouch's Recursion. But anyway, before we get to that, I'm going to preface each of the reviews with a little trailer that I've cobbled together from clips from the Back to the Future films, kind of foreshadowing. Let's put it that way. Anyway, let's begin with Robert Silverberg's Up the Line.
And he can sleep in my room.
Why are you so nervous?
Rain, have you ever...
Okay, so there we are, Marty getting it on with his mum there. So yes, that kind of foreshadows what this book is about in some ways. Because, I mean, if you had a time machine at your disposal, what would you do? I mean, where would you go? Would you see perhaps the crucifixion of Christ? A famous battle? The assassination of Abraham Lincoln, perhaps? Or would you go back and fuck your own mother? Now, I'm being facetious here, of course. It's not about going back and having sexual congress with your own mother, but ancestral incest is in the mix, just to warn you. So, originally published in 1969 in a serialized form in Amazing Stories, it was then later published in novel form by Ballantine. And that's what we've got here. This is my copy. It's a fairly large format edition. And it's got this wonderful kind of fractal, whatchamacallit on it. That's the one we've got there, my loves. All right, so yes, we know there's incest in the mix. But anyway, let's talk about the story itself. We're following a young chap by the name of Judd Elliot II. And where we meet him, it's 2059, so almost 100 years in the future from when Silverberg wrote this. And it's envisaging a time where time travel is not only possible, but readily employed in a leisure sense. Instead of going abroad to go on holiday, you go back in time to observe various famous things, the crucifixion of Christ, various assassinations, famous battles and the like. And Judd, he's currently working for a law firm, but he's become disillusioned with the whole thing because the whole thing's run by robots, it would seem, and his function is limited at that. So he decides to become a time courier, it's called. So he's one of the people that ferry small groups of people into the past to experience whatever they're experiencing. So he's basically there to make sure nothing goes wrong. Firstly, that no one gets hurt, and secondly, to make sure that that time isn't drastically altered by them being there. But things can and do go wrong, and so the last line of defense, if you will, is the time patrol. So they police everything that goes on. If back in the now time, we'll get to that in a moment, if they notice things have changed for whatever reason, they'll go back and try and find the source of it. If you're found responsible in any way, if you're a time courier, you're responsible of drastically altering time on purpose, you're sentenced to death. So this is quite a serious matter. So yeah, I was saying about now time. So just a little bit about the science or the pseudoscience that's involved here. To go up the line is to go back in time. To go down the line is to go back to now time. So there is an absolute kind of bedrock, a rolling line of time that's experienced in the now. You can't use the the technology to go forward in time, only back. And then there's rules pertaining to when you come back. You can't come back. Yes, you've got to come back to the point that's rolling, if you will. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think you probably get the idea, even though I'm making a complete shambles of this. So yes, this is the lion's share of what it's about, taking these various jaunts into the past, experiencing lots of famous things going on. First of all, over in America, where it's set, I think it begins in New Orleans. That's where it begins. That's where he has his training. But later on, he follows his specialism, and that is Byzantine history. So he knows a thing or two about the Byzantine era. And so then he primarily operates in that arena. So like many time travel stories, you have to be in the location you want to visit in the past, location-wise. So you have to therefore go over to Paris if you want to see the building of the Eiffel Tower, that kind of thing. So I'll touch briefly on the on the incest part here, because at some point he meets, these aren't really spoilers because it's even in the blurb about this, but he meets one of the time couriers that has fun on the side tracing down his ancestors and potentially shagging them. And so at the time, Judd thinks this is just an absolutely terrible idea, but at a certain point he starts coming around to this. I don't think he's hell-bent on that as initially. I think all the way through he's like, there's no way I would do that. But anyway, he traces his lineage all the way down the line. I mean, it's kind of far-fetched that he manages to eventually find ancestors that are within the Byzantine Empire. Now, at this point, there could be spoilers. I'm not going to do anything too naughty, but just to say that it's kind of a forbidden love story in some ways, because he finds one of his distant ancestors and falls in love with her. She's a young woman of 17 at the time, I think, and becomes obsessed with her. And you can probably imagine what happens. But this causes no end of problems. And the paradoxes that are supposed to be avoided at all cost start springing up at left, right and centre. It gets very confusing, but very, very interesting. So one of the paradoxes that's quite prevalent within the book is the idea that if you're going back and observing something really popular, for example, the crucifixion of Christ, you're going to have an accumulation of visitors. So, for example, the number of people that would have been observing the crucifixion, let's say, would gradually increase as more and more tourists are taken to that site. So the problem that arises is that eventually you start noticing within the crowd other versions of yourself, and you don't know whether they're a past self or a future self. I mean, there's an interesting idea that, what's the cutoff point here? I mean, you could have, there's an assassination attempt or a successful assassination of someone. I think it's in New Orleans. I can't quite remember now, but the number of people that are at this place, I think it's a hotel. There's just loads of people there. It's just crazy. But there's this idea that, what's the cutoff point? This same scenario, there could be thousands of people here. I mean, yeah, that was quite interesting. The other idea is that you could inadvertently kind of close loops. So if you inadvertently met yourself at a certain point and had some influence over their actions, it would negate your own existence. Things like that. So yeah, really interesting ideas concerning paradoxes. Now, just to get to the way it's written itself, I absolutely loved Judd's voice. So we're seeing it through his perspective. Wonderfully written and very, very funny. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. There were some problems. I'm going to get to that in a moment. Now, one thing that's interesting is that Silverberg, I mean, I've not read much of him, but what is it? The Book of Skulls. I know there was a fair bit of sexual content in there. And this has it throughout. And it's imagining a very, very sexually liberated 2059. I know this was written during the great liberation of sex anyway, during the 60s. But this is like that on steroids. There's people fucking each other left, right and centre. It's kind of... It's been reduced in some ways as kind of something people do just to meet, instead of shaking someone's hand, you'll just have a shag, perhaps. So a lot of the romance has been extracted from that act, if you will. There's orgies, and I mean, one of the chaps is like molesting some robots. I mean, it's kind of tiptoeing into unpleasant territory, I would say. And this is also born out later on. There are some interactions with, say, serving maids and things like that are definitely on the dodgy side. Certainly in terms of men lording it over women. I would say that for sure. And perhaps this is a product of its time in that respect. There's also some kind of casual racism as well, which is unfortunate, and it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. I mean, it's not maliciously intended, perhaps, but so one of Judd's friends, a black man that got him into the job, shall we say, there's words tossed about, and it's not good. Let's put it that way. Even though the intentions are not malicious per se, in current times, it's just no good, really. But that was a small thing, really. It's how you read it. You've got to read it at the time and all of that. But yeah, I didn't like that. And also, there's some very unpleasant. It's kind of associated with this kind of slapdash approach to just fucking anything that moves, kind of thing. There's also some paedophilia that arises later on. It's certainly not condoned at all, and it's looked upon poorly, but at the same time very little is done to stop it happening, and I found that quite dodgy as well. It needs to happen for the story to work later on, but that wasn't pleasant. The last thing I'll say as well is that the fact that it focuses so heavily on the Byzantine era is interesting. I suppose in some ways it's because it was perhaps a similar era of excesses, perhaps. Although there's an interesting part where the concept of kissing isn't around during that time. So a woman that he's with doesn't really know what he's doing with his lips, shall we say. I'm not sure. I found that hard to believe, but it would be interesting if that were the case. But yeah, he seems to be really interested in that era. And it reminded me of The Gate of Worlds that I read recently, an alternate history whereby the Aztec Empire was allowed to grow and become a world power. And back in the 1980s, it was the world power kind of thing. So he was really obsessed and really interested and invested within that culture and the history of that culture. I got the same kind of gist going on here. He absolutely loved that time. And there's a lot of information about various mosques and various other buildings, when they were created and when they were torn down and built anew and things like that, various frescoes. So really richly painted scenes. And just all very lovely, I would say. Anyway, let's get the devil down and give it a damn good thrashing. So I would have given this 5 out of 5. I mean, I got 4/5 through before some of the unpleasantness reared its ugly head. And I was thinking, this is 5 out of 5, knock it out of the park kind of thing, to use an American saying there. We don't say that. I don't know what we'd say. Hit it for 6, shall we say, and use a cricketing term. Anyway, so I'm just going to knock 1 star off for that. It was still bloody good. So 4 out of 5. Yeah, bloody lovely. Oh my god, this is going to be a very long video. Apologies. Right, the next one's coming up, and it's Ken Grimwood's Replay.
I'll finish those reports on up tonight, and I'll run them on over first thing tomorrow, all right?
Hey, not too early. I sleep in Saturday. Oh, McFly, your shoes untied. Oh.
Now, this has an interesting feature. It has a dust jacket.
Now, Beth, don't con me.
I'm sorry, Mr. McFly. I meant I was just starting on the second coat.
Yeah, Biff, what a character.
Right, so yeah, that trailer wasn't quite as successful as describing this book as the other one was, but the almanac and all of that, you'll get the idea when we start talking about it. But this was published back in 1986. 2 years later, it won the World Fantasy Award for Best Novel. So yes, good stuff, I would say. Now, we follow a chap called Jeff Winston. Throughout this book, we're seeing it through his perspective, and the first couple of pages, well, in fact, the first couple of lines, perhaps, we're with him at the moment of his death in 1980 something. I can't remember what it is, 89 perhaps? No, 88? Fuck. 1988. So he dies of a massive heart attack, and he thinks it's all over. And the things that we're aware of at that point, both we and he are both aware of this, he hasn't really had a good life. He's still with his wife, but they're not getting on very well. They never had children. They were never able to have children. Perhaps that's part of the problem. And his career never really went anywhere. So we get the idea that he hasn't been happy. He dies, and that's all there is. But then he wakes up again, back in 1963, back in his 18-year-old body. He's back in his dorm room at university. Really brilliantly written. We get the idea of how confused he is. He thinks he's going mad. It's some kind of psychosis. Perhaps he's in a coma back in 1988 and living through this alternate idea that he's still living, perhaps. But yes, this is what's happened. For whatever reason, he's gone back in time. And so it's about him living another life. Now, I've got to be very careful here. There's spoilers. I don't want to give hardly anything away here because you really need to read this book. It was so wonderful. So a couple of things I'll say is this is a recurring problem. That's one thing. I'm not going to say how far along this goes, but he can't really escape this. So he's having multiple lives. And the first life he has, he's attempting to repair the life that he's originally had. So he's trying to make things better, but he finds that that's impossible. It just can't be done. He's trying to do something that happened organically before and trying to force it, for example. But anyway, the almanac that I used in that trailer comes into fruition here because, of course, one of those things you would do if you could go back in time is that you would start placing bets on things that you knew were going to win. And so that's what happens. Every time he's able to do this, and this appears in other books, and it'll appear in Recursion as well, that I'll talk about last of all, the idea that you can very easily make money, either by betting on horses or fights or football games or whatever, or even speculating on the economy, finance and things like that, investing money. So that side of things is always set. So he's always able to have a lot of money, shall we say. But money doesn't bring you happiness, of course. There's lots of things that happen. Each version of the life that he tries to live has its own problems. That's all I'll say on that note. Also, there's that kind of heart-rending moment where you've lived a whole life and you've got to start it all over again. I mean, that would be absolute hell, especially if you managed to carve out a successful life, a happy that you were actually contented in. I mean, there's one version or a couple of versions where he gets close to that, for example, and then have it all erased and you're back as a fucking dirty, smelly, useless bastard of a student back in your digs. Now, that would not be a very pleasant way to live, would it? Now, that's kind of all I'll say. There's another thing happened. So every time you're replaying history, we're cognizant of the life he's lived, the various historical things that happen. We're aware of them as well. But there's something that happens on one of the playthroughs, one of these replays, that really jars. And it's really amazing when it happens. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but when it happened, I was like, fucking hell, I thought I knew what was going on here, but that's a big thing. Something weird has happened. if you've read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I loved that. Absolutely loved it. And it was an art form. That's all I'll say. It was an art form. It was wonderful. The other thing I wanted to get across was the not only a sense of nostalgia for an earlier time. Obviously, I wasn't around during the 1960s, but there's enough films that we see said, go talk about Back to the Future. The difference between the 1980s and the 1950s was massive, the gulf between those two. And so we're going between two similar time eras here, two times. We're going from the 80s back to the 60s, but the difference between those two lived experiences, what's going on in terms of technology, but just the way society works, those differences were really interesting. In some ways far more backward, but in other ways far nicer. People were nicer to each other potentially, and slightly more provincial in terms of their knowledge and experience of the world. Coming from the hard-nosed 80s, high technology, boom or bust, money fucking all over the place, and the kind of cutthroat world that the 80s was, going back to the simpler times of the 60s. Yeah, that I love that dynamic between those two eras. But also, now this is the last thing I'll talk about about this book, is that it really touched me emotionally. Now, I'm not going to get too deep here, my loves, but very poignant. Now, going back, so Jeff goes back, and at a certain point he calls his parents. Now, in the time where he dies in the late 80s, I think his father's already passed away, and his mother is infirm or something like that. So he goes back and he talks to them, experiencing them. Oh, I'm getting bloody emotional thinking about it. Sorry, stupid. But the idea of going back and talking to your parents, I suppose when you're growing up, say you're a teenager, you've lived with your parents all your life, and I suppose you're kind of sick of each other in a way. Your parents are just as sick of you as you are of them. But then you go back with the knowledge of where they are and whether they're even alive or not, and you go back and you're able to talk to them. Imagine that. There's a moment of that, but the character himself didn't have that emotional response, but I did. And it kind of touched me. And fucking hell. I ended up calling my parents a couple of days after reading that, because it's just in my mind. Fucking hell. Sorry about that. My Christ. Anyway, right. This book will move you, basically. Let's get the devil down. Come on. Right, so I think you probably know where this is going. I'm giving this 5 out of 5 without question. Now, I suppose in some ways it's not perfect. I think when you're... Ken Grimwood does a brilliant job of this, but at the same time, there's something about experiencing someone else's life that never quite rings true. Let's put it that way. Especially when they're living in ways that we're not used to, perhaps. I don't know quite how to frame it, but yeah, it wasn't perfect, but I'd still give it 5 out of 5 because I think it really is an important book, and it really will move you, and it will expand your mind, and it will make you appreciate life in general, my loves. You don't need a time-traveling machine for that. A time machine for that. Anyway, last book, Recursion by Blake Crouch. Okay, who remembers that scene from Back to the Future where an atom bomb was dropped and wiped everyone out? Of course, that wasn't from Back to the Future. That was from the Terminator film. What was it, Judgment Day, perhaps? I don't know. But that gets to the crux of what's going on here. We'll get to that in a moment. But first of all, thank you, Nucky Nelson. So he recommended this book to me, and so far he's never let me down. Every book he's recommended to me, it's really been absolutely brilliant. So this is a spoiler. This book is fucking brilliant. So this was published in 2019. So this is officially the most recent book I've ever read, apart from, what was it? No, Jeff Vandermeer's Absolution. So the second most recent book. So look at that cover. Absolutely cracking cover there. The only problem is I'm not amused by the way this book's been bound. The fucking pages are falling out of the thing. I'm not going to show you because it pisses me off too much, but it was like holding a stack of printer paper. Every time I turned a page, there's one floating down beside me like a fallen leaf, my loves. You don't want that when you're reading a book. But perhaps the publisher's been very canny here. Perhaps the book is supposed to self-destruct. If that's the case, well, yeah, I doff my cap and well done. But no, otherwise fucking annoying. Right, so yes, what's this about, my loves? Well, let's read the blurb. Okay, so we've got two main characters here. I'm terrible at remembering names. So two main characters. We've got Helena, and Barry. Barry's a New York detective. Apologies. And Helena is a kind of a pioneering scientist in terms of mapping the brain. And the two of them are trying to come to terms with a phenomenon that's affecting humanity. What's it called again? It doesn't matter what it's called, my loves, but it's a kind of mind virus. So every now and then people, they suddenly have a shock in which they're remembering a past life that never existed. A completely different path that they never took. They thought they were married to another person, that they had children, and then they suddenly realize they don't have any of that. And so a lot of people end up committing suicide because of this malady that's going on. That's kind of how we begin this journey. But so I'll talk more about the machinery that's guiding what's going on here, because time travel is being employed. Of course it is. That's why we're talking about this today. But rather like Replay, Ken Grimwood's Replay, it's about the transference of one's mentality or your consciousness into the past. So there's a way of taking your mind and zooming it back to an earlier part of your life, based on a memory. So if you have a vivid memory of the past, you can go back there. Based on this machine that Helena, fucking hell, creates. Now I've got to be very careful here. This is very complex, and a lot of this is introduced further on in the book, so I don't want it to be too spoilery. But so who of you that are still listening, well done if you've made it this far, by the way. Who watched the OA, the Netflix drama? There's 2 seasons of it. Unfortunately, the 3rd season was never, they were never going to make the 3rd one, which is an absolute travesty. It was a wonderful series. But that was back in 2016. So I'm thinking perhaps Blake Crouch. I find his name quite hard to remember for some reason. Blake Crouch. It sounds Dickensian, doesn't it? It's a kind of name that might appear in a Dickens story. But anyway, that's beside the point. I'm wondering if perhaps he was influenced by that series, because in that something similar was going on, wasn't it? There was that bastard of a scientist that was kind of, he had trapped some people and was trying to kill them and bring them back again, and to see if they were being sent to a parallel universe. I think that was what was going on here. This is very similar. So it's not only you're going back through time, but you're kind of fracturing into another universe almost. it gets very, very complicated, these fractures appearing. But there's a similar antagonist in this to the OA. We've got a scientist. We don't really know where he, as we go on, we get to find out where he's come from and what the association with Helena is. But it's quite convoluted. But he's an evil bastard. Now, the wonderful thing about this book is I got so far into it, and once you know the concept that, you know, you're able to go back in time and influence the past in a very similar way to any of these other books where you do something and there are repercussions down the line, shall we say. This book takes it to the nth degree, my love. So I got so far in, I thought, why don't you take it here? I mean, that would be amazing. Few pages later, that's exactly where it went. We're talking post-apocalyptic and then some, my loves. It's scary shit. It's wonderful. This needs to be optioned for a movie. It would be a wonderful film, but it would be scary as hell. Yeah, so, right, I'll just talk about this very briefly here. This is a spoiler, so if you want to pop forward a minute or so, please do so. It's not a major thing, but it's about what happens if you change the past. So this kind of mind virus that's affecting people is because there's someone somewhere that's using this machine that Helena has created. And so when you get back to the point where you left, this new timeline that you created, it's remembered by everyone that's affected by it, shall we say. So there's one chap, this is the spoiler. He goes back and he was an architect, and he'd always dreamed of building a massive building in Manhattan. And lo and behold, that's exactly what he does. He goes back and gets this building built. Cut forward to present time, the moment that he stepped into this machine, which operates in a very similar way to the OA, you actually physically die before being sent back in time. When time catches up to that moment, this fucking building appears instantly. And everyone's like, what the fuck is that? It's this building that never existed. It's taller than any building on the skyline. Built taller than, I don't know what the tallest building is currently in Manhattan, but it's big. This motherfucker's big. And everyone's freaking out. And people are jumping off buildings, killing themselves. That was so brilliant. And I imagined that in a kind of filmic way, how that might be portrayed in a film. It is really wonderfully done. Okay, so now the only criticism I have is that, but it's not a criticism. It is and it isn't. The way it's written, it's almost like reading a Dan Brown novel. So the prose aren't exactly mind-blowing, but it carries the story forward at a blistering pace. You know, the term a page turner, and I always say, yeah, it's not really, but this one is. This one, you're turning, I mean, in my case, I was turning pages and they're flying around because they weren't bound correctly, but I was turning those pages like a motherfucker, I can tell you. The story, this is one of those rare examples where the story is better, well, not better, but superior to the writing. The writing is merely the carrier wave upon which the story gets slotted into your brain. It does the bare minimum, but it's enough. You don't want it to be too flowery. You don't want it to be poetic even, although it probably does go that way a little bit at times. But it's more about the story. It just gets hard-coded into your brain instantly, and it's a wonderful experience. I will read other Blake Crouch novels in the future, I can tell you that for nothing. Anyway, let's bring this devil down. What do you think I'll give this one, my loves? Of course, it's got to be 5 out of 5. Yep, I can't recommend that highly enough. I think you'll see what I mean. I mean, it's not going to win any prizes for prose, as I've said, but it's so damn good. Anyway, there we are. Let's leave that there. I think we've gone on long enough, my loves. Now, it depends how I feel later, but I may do something on the end of here, but I don't know yet. Anyway, thank you, my loves. Thank you for watching my very long video, and I will see you next time. Cheerio. bonus content. Power of love is curious thing. Make a one man weep, make another man sing. Change your heart to a little white dove. More than a feeling, that's the power of love. Tougher the diamonds, whipped like cream. Stronger and harder than a wacko's dream. Make a bad one good, make a wrong one right. Power of love will keep you home at night, oh yeah. Don't need money, don't take fame. Don't need no credit card to ride this train. It's strong and it's sudden and it's cruel sometimes, but it might just save your life. That's the power of love. Down Louisiana, close to New Orleans. We back up in the woods among the evergreens. There stood a log cabin made up from wood, where lived a country boy named Jimmy Be Good, who never ever learned to read or write so well, but he could play guitar like it's doing a bell. Go, 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 Jimmy, go, 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 Jimmy, go, 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 Jimmy, go, 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 Jimmy, go, go. Jimmy Be Good. Tell me, doctor, where are we going this time? Is it 50s or 1999? All I wanted to do was play my guitar and sing. So take me away, I don't mind, but you better promise me I'll be back in time. Gotta go back in time. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him 2 lips like roses and clover. Then tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Sandman, I'm so alone. Don't have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream.